Perspective. We mythologize highways, but they've damaged communities of color. By Ryan Reft, The Washington Post, adapted by Newsela staff January 4, 2024. Interstate highway construction has a problematic racial history. Last year, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg unveiled new efforts to address this problematic history. He dedicated $1 billion to reconnect cities and neighborhoods racially segregated or divided by road projects. But with the interstate system turning 67 years old this year, it is important to understand its troubled history. Planners knew early on that the interstates could disproportionately harm communities of color in cities, and officials still passed laws to reinforce racial divides. Officials chose to build the highways anyway. In 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, allowing the interstates to be built. The construction and engineering of a new interstate system was a massive project. Eisenhower's law imposed new design standards that emphasized greater flow, wider freeway lanes and more complex interchanges, or road crossings. From 1958 to 1966, the project was the largest source of federal funding to the states. Earlier highways snaked around older communities, but the 1956 Act favored straight lines that sliced through neighborhoods. In the 2 decades following its passage, nearly 1 million people had to move homes because of highway construction. Highway planners knew construction would be harmful. Non-white residents and homeowners were disproportionately affected by this displacement. Federal housing policies such as redlining prevented people of color from obtaining cheap, bank-supported mortgages for single-family homes. Redlining is a racist practice where someone is denied services, like a loan from a bank, because of where they live. In the Cold War era, following the end of World War II, all-white suburbs boomed and developed rapidly. Meanwhile, populations of color lived in segregated, crowded communities with little support or assistance to improve these conditions. Many of these neighborhoods that housed communities of color were later destroyed by planners, engineers and politicians for highway construction. The impact felt by Black and Latino residents in cities included community destruction, loss of generational wealth and exposure to environmental dangers. And from the beginning, highway planners knew that the new interstates threatened these communities. In 1958, the Highway Research Board called together the Sagamore Conference, an event attended by top federal, state and municipal officials, academics and civic leaders. The group issued a report that clearly noted the perils of highway construction. It warned of widespread displacement, with low-income, non-white and elderly residents facing the greatest potential injury. Yet, the highway construction that the report warned about continued across the nation. This initial awareness of the problems caused by interstate construction was erased from internal policy reports in the mid-1970s. Later, the official Department of Transportation records also removed references to these concerns. These histories did not acknowledge how officials failed to prevent the highway's unequal impacts. The results were devastating. For example, in Montgomery, Alabama, during the 1950s, Sam Engelhart, an Alabama politician, punished civil rights activists by running the new highway through West Montgomery, home to Rosa Parks, E.D. Nixon and other civil rights activists. In Chicago, Illinois, Mayor Richard J. Daley used highway construction funds to build the Dan Ryan Expressway, further isolating the city's black communities. Thousands of families have been displaced. Similar instances happened with Interstate 94 splitting up the historically black community of Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota. In Los Angeles, California, the construction of the East Los Angeles Interchange displaced thousands of Latino families. This highway also robbed Boyle Heights and East Los Angeles of green space. These practices became the norm for the interstate highway system. The highways and their construction had lasting impacts on the physical and cultural spaces of the United States. In the past 30 years, around 6,300 families have been displaced by the nation's largest highway expansion projects. For decades, policymakers have not fully addressed these issues brought on by highway construction. In 1966, large protests against highway construction broke out in what became known as the Freeway Revolts. In response, lawmakers created the Department of Transportation to supervise national road construction. The government also passed laws such as the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. This new legislation helped some communities prevent construction and protect the environment. However, many non-white homeowners did not have the political or financial power to defend their communities, particularly in the courts. Popular songs and novels celebrated highways as symbols of freedom and opportunity, such as Jack Kerouac's 1957 novel, On the Road. Furthermore, highways became central for Americans' everyday lives, regardless of a person's gender, race, or ethnicity. This cultural shift prevented people from truly understanding the interstate's impacts. Cars were a symbol of freedom. Even before the 1956 Act, Americans had already embraced the car as a vehicle for greater freedom and opportunity. Black American travelers even created the Green Book, which was an annual travel guide published from 1936 to 1964. The book provided information for black motorists regarding lodging, food and other information to ensure safe travel in the country. In 1971, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell even observed that losing one's driver's license is more serious for some individuals than a stay in jail. Throughout most parts of American culture, highways have represented spaces of freedom, community, and economic success. Historian Sarah Jo Peterson and planner Stephen Haigeschied have been vocal in advocating for an honest investigation into the interstate's impact on communities. If we have any hope of avoiding future injustices, we have to fully understand the past, notes Haigeschied. Deconstructing the myth behind the creation of the interstate highway system, unwinding the overly simplistic narratives that have defined the interstates and putting forth ideas for the future serve as the first steps in understanding this history. The next will be to correct it.